to this launch event for the Principles for Learning and Guide to Training. My name is Graham Harris. I'm pleased to host you today. I'm part of IFC's Financial Institutions Group. I'm aligned to our Asia advisory practice. And for the last 3 years, I've been leading a global project developing IFC's SME training and capacity building programs. We have around 600 participants that are signed up today, both internal to the World Bank Group and also external. And I think that really highlights the importance of the topic in which we are talking about today. I will briefly present the principles for learning and the guide to training in a moment, and then that will be followed by a panel composed of key partners and contributors to the program. Given the large number today, we have muted the microphones. So that said, we encourage everyone to use the chat and question and answer functions. Depending on the settings of your WebEx, that may look slightly different. I see a number of people are have already found these functions. You can access it through the panel in the center of the presentation and also on the right-hand side. And you should see both the chat function and the Q&A function listed. The chat for general input. If you have any specific questions, we would ask you to document them in the question and answer bottom, and we will address those during the session. First of all, I'm pleased to introduce Paulo Dubal, who's the Global Senior Director of the Financial Institutions Group of IFC, to give his opening remarks.
Thank you, Graham, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's good to have 600 people across the world participating here today. I'll try to be very brief on my remarks, as the important part of the discussion is actually the panel discussion and the fruitful conversation we'll have. But let me start by extending thanks to Canada, Luxembourg, and Norway. Without your support, these initiatives would not have been possible. Okay, as most of you know, SMEs create about 70% of jobs in emerging markets. And according to IFC's own estimates, 600 million jobs will be needed by 2030 to absorb the growing workforce, which makes SMEs development a high priority for many governments around the world. Given this large gap, learning and skills training across key economic sectors are increasingly more important. We need to continue to invest in people by providing learning and skills development solutions. And we need to do this at scale by using technology platforms and the train-the-trainer solutions. And we need to do this at scale, as I said, using the train-the-trainer concept. This requires a set of principles to ensure that the core concepts and quality of the training and job skills capacity building is maintained, and to grow the network of trainers. In this context, IFC has partnered with industry leaders to create a set of principles for learning for training and advisory service providers working in emerging markets. What the team is introducing here today are guidelines and frameworks to help increase consistency, scale, and impact of skills and learning programs. I'll now hand over to Graham Harris, who just introduced himself and will be leading this project and will be leading the conversation. I look forward to hearing many inspiring stories from the panel today and having a lively discussions. I'll be around and hopefully I can contribute during the Q&A sessions as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulo. During the last 3 years, we have been leading a program to renew and revamp IFC's approaches to skills development and capacity building. And why are we doing this? We're doing it because we've come to understand that traditional approaches have been suboptimal. Based on many IFC evaluations and IFC analysis, we believe that there's an opportunity to further improve the consistency, to improve the quality, and indeed to improve the reach of our programs and availability of qualified local providers that can support our programs in emerging markets. That being said, what we really wanted to highlight today is that there is huge demand and huge interest in this topic. And again, I think the fact that there are 600 people registered for this event reinforces that. Around 3 years ago, we started conducting a study together with Deloitte Consulting. That study partly confirmed that there was not a set of frameworks or standards for the deployment and delivery of learning and training programs in emerging markets. We also talked a lot to our own network of learning specialists around the world, and we determined together with Deloitte that over 90% of micro and small enterprises surveyed, and indeed over 90% of our training network saw the value or had demand for greater standards and certification in terms of the work that they do. The gap was that they did not have access to this initially. Equally, when we look at IFC, when we look at IFC's own client surveys on an annual basis, we typically see that in addition to access to finance being a very important factor demanded by our clients, up to 50% of our clients regularly inform us that they see skills development as a critical need where they are asking for support from IFC. More broadly, we see there's a huge amount of money spent on capacity building. So according to the UN, and these numbers are from 2017, there's upwards of $33 billion US spent on capacity building on an annual basis. Now, that is not to say that all of this funding is direct in training. It's quite broad capacity building. This is a huge sector. There are a lot of different organizations for the there's an opportunity for us to deliver training at greater quality, to deliver greater consistency in training, to have significantly more reach and impact, and related to that, the cost effectiveness of our programs. And we also believe that it's very important to increase the availability of what we call local advisory services. I would like to just introduce a brief poll. So everybody should be able to access this poll. We have a relatively short time limit. We would like you to answer the question, really to understand the degree to which these issues resonate with you and your organizations. So what challenges do you face when conducting training programs? The poll should have come up on your screen, and we'll just pause for a few seconds while you have an opportunity to answer that. I think that it says the poll has ended. Are we able to see the results of the poll? Very good. Okay. So around 30 to 40% have answered that each of these issues resonate to you. This is typically consistent. So beyond the IFC and World Bank Group experience, as we've engaged with other international and other local development organizations, as we've engaged with members of the Aspen Andy network, these types of issues have consistently resonated with them. And what I think it draws is the possibility that we may be able to face some of these common challenges or tackle some of these common challenges together. We can take the poll down. Thank you. So let me first start with the principles for learning. So why do we need principles? Really, I think this is around a couple of things. Firstly, following a framework to help us to design and deliver learning or training programs can ensure a strong foundation and a consistent foundation for these programs. What's more, having a set of framework or principles can help us to move more quickly, to take decisions more quickly, even when we're facing or a program leader is facing a situation that is new. So the principles that I'm going to present today briefly, they draw on best practices from around the World Bank Group, also from a range of learning institutions and specialists on best practices. We've integrated expertise on gender and also in working on fragile and conflict situations and more broadly in emerging markets. There are 8 principles, which you can see here. These principles reflect 4 key elements that we believe are important in conducting successful training and skills development programs. So these principles are, they should be impactful, inclusive, scalable, and sustainable. So our program has been established based on these foundational principles with the expectation that if they are widely adopted or recognized, that they can improve the quality, consistency, and impact of our own learning programs. That said, these are applicable beyond IFC and the World Bank Group, so we believe that they can be used by any company, any organization, any individual as a screening or guiding criteria when developing training, learning, or capacity building programs. Secondly, we wanted to briefly introduce the guide to training, which we see as putting the principles into action and providing a roadmap for the design and implementation of successful learning and skills development program. Firstly, this is a document we've been working on for almost 2 years. It's a very substantive document. It's around 160 pages. That said, it is not designed for putting on a bookcase. It is designed as a practical manual to support the development of effective learning programs. We used as a base a partnership with a global learning institution, a Canadian organization, the Institute for Performance and Learning, I4PL. They had developed a base of a competency guide, and based on our understanding of the gap in the market relating to the Deloitte study, where we determined that this type of material was not available in the emerging markets of our focus, we worked with I4PL and we adapted this competency guide based on our experience of operating in emerging markets. We also put integrated a strong gender component and integrated a strong component of operating in difficult working environments. You can see that each wedge in the wheel represents a part of the learning cycle, everything from the need to assess performance needs, to design of curricular and learning experiences, to facilitation of learning itself, effective transfer of learning, and evaluation of learning. Now, throughout the phases, it's very important to maintain a strong relationship and partnership with clients, and so that's why the partnering with clients is in the center. And again, this guide to training, in addition to the principles, is available to you. And we believe that this can be a useful reading or reference guide for trainers, for coaches, for local advisory service providers, and basically anybody that manages a learning program or skills development program within an organization. As mentioned, we have incorporated a very strong component of gender inclusion throughout the guide. In addition to that, we've created a separate gender supplement. This was designed in conjunction with IFC's Gender and Economic Inclusion Group, with our Banking on Women team, which is aligned to our financial institutions practice. and also with a range of gender practitioners around the world, both internal to IFC and the World Bank Group and externally. Similarly, we recognize that working in fragile and conflict situations has its own challenges. I'm pleased that Adnan from Yemen is able to join us later today in order to give us his experience. So we have integrated a strong component of or documented our knowledge of working in fragile and conflict situations. And again, in addition to being integrated throughout the guide to training, it's included as a separate supplement. We also wanted to kind of very briefly give you an outline of the broader program. So the principles for learning and the guide to training incorporate two very important pieces of a broader program. I wanted to direct you to an online resource, which is the Grow, Learn, Connect site. You can access it by typing growlearnconnect.org into your browser. If you want to find or download the principles for learning or the guide to training, they can both be accessed on the growlearnconnect.org site. You'll also see it's primarily a digital platform that is designed for learning professionals and also those program leaders or organizations that need to connect with learning professionals. On this site, you can see a range of online capacity building courses in addition to relating to effective facilitation. There's a range of trainer certifications. You see on this screen, we highlight 3 certifications. One is IFC's own Certified Master Trainer qualification in facilitating learning. Secondly, we have developed a partnership with a UK-based organization, the Learning and Performance Institute, LPI. And you see on this screen both the Certified Assessor and the Certified Trainer certification. We believe that certification is important, and especially external certification, and can help to increase the assurance of quality and consistency of delivery. Also included on the Grow, Learn, Connect site is a directory of training professionals and training providers around the world that can be accessed, and from a trainer's perspective, can be a useful means in which for them to market their services and also to demonstrate the certifications that they have. Lastly, I just wanted to give a quick flavor or example of how we have used the different aspects of this program from a kind of a practical delivery perspective. And this specifically relates to the COVID-19 situation, where we have used aspects of this program to be able to quickly deliver to our clients. This particular program was initiated or conceived as part of our FIG, our Financial Institutions Asia response back in early February of this year, but has now been extended to our partnerships in the Middle East and Africa and Latin America, in Eastern Europe. And again, we're seeing very significant demand for support in this area. Very basically, we developed a series of capacity building webinars specifically tailored to the COVID situation, which you can see listed here. And this was really to help the customers of financial institutions to sustain their businesses during the expected economic downturn, maintain their access to finance, and kind of navigate through these challenging times. It's also a means by which financial institutions could reach out or touch their own customers in a meaningful way. One thing I wanted to point out as we've done this around the world is that we have partnered with or engaged with our own network of IFC certified trainers and master trainers in delivering this. And so this approach enables us to kind of significantly scale up the program. And indeed, we've already delivered these training programs in over seven different languages. I wanted to briefly, finally, before we initiate the panel, I just wanted to say, so we have a number of kind of people or resources that you can access. We would very much like to encourage you to engage further with us. The first two resources, the growlearnconnect.org site and the link provided to IFC's own website, presents an opportunity to download both the guide to training, the principles for learning, and also access information on all of the other resources that I had mentioned around capacity building courses, around certification, around the directory of trainers, and so on. We'd also encourage you to reach out to myself or any of my co-leads on this program. So that includes Kidiga for the Middle East and Africa, and my colleague Rath Kim for global. You can please reach out to any of us, and also please, we would direct you to the growlearnconnect.org and the IFC site as resources. Next, I would like to pass to my colleague Heather Kipnis. Heather is a senior operations officer in the Gender and Economic Inclusion Group for IFC to lead the panel discussion. Heather's been a great partner to us in developing many of these tools and resources. She's been delivering gender inclusive SME capacity building programs for over 10 years, a significant time with IFC. She's led the contribution of inputs, in particular to the gender supplement for the guide to training, and has supported us in drawing from learnings from across the World Bank, from across IFC partners, including Andy, including Value for Women. So thanks for joining, Heather, and over to you to lead the panel discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Graham. Just by thumbs up, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, I'm getting thumbs up. All right, great. Well, fantastic. Thanks so much, Graham, for the excellent presentation on the principles and the introduction to the guides for trainings. Very excited that this is being published, and congratulations to you and the team. And also thanks so much for the thoughtful introduction. So good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone joining us from across the time zones. It's really exciting to know that I think, Graham, you mentioned over 600 people have registered, and I see over 300 people online. So definitely a testament to the demand and need for standards for the design, delivery, and evaluation of learning programs in emerging markets. In today's panel discussion, we are aiming to take the discussion forward into the practical application of what these principles and guidelines mean for trainings, particularly for SMEs in emerging markets, and also bring in some of the context that we're facing, particularly in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. So joining me today are three impressive leaders that collectively have decades of experience and knowledge in supporting the entrepreneurship sector in emerging markets, and particularly in delivering SME training programs in some of the most challenging contexts where there's political instability and violence is present, and also where many of us I mentioned are facing how do we navigate these learning programs amidst COVID-19. So we are going to dive into some of these challenges. Hopefully you'll be inspired by some of the solutions that our speakers are recommending and implementing. And we'll hear about some of the tools that Graham had mentioned, how they're being utilized, and learn about some of the ways that women's participation can be promoted, particularly through what we call gender inclusive programming, and how we can support the growth of businesses in fragile and conflicted situations. So for those that just joined, I know some folks were joining while Graham was presenting, everyone's been muted, and we will have a Q&A session after we hear from the panelists. And the Q&A will be enter your questions into the chat, and so that our colleagues who are monitoring those will select a few That's common. So without further ado, let me quickly introduce our panelists, and then I'll dive right in with some questions for them. So joining us, we have Randall Kempner, who's the Executive Director of ANDE, which is the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. And I've had the pleasure of knowing Randall for a few years and observing his leadership with ANDE to support, I think now it's almost about, or maybe upwards to 300 institutions that provide business support, both financial and non-financial, to small and growing businesses, as ANDE refers to it, in emerging markets. So welcome, Randall. We also have Margaret Jackson, who is the managing partner at Rainbow Consult Ghana. Rainbow Consult is an award-winning training provider who has led many gender-inclusive SME capacity building programs across Africa. So thanks so much for joining, Margaret. And I believe Adnan Mohammed Al-Sada is joining us as well. He's getting connected, and he is the CEO of Capital Management Consulting, which we'll refer to as CMC, which is based in Yemen, and is a leader in providing training services, and also an accomplished author. Adnan has written over 22 books on small and medium enterprises. So very warm welcome to all of you. So Randall, I'll start with you, and please unmute yourself if you're muted. Let's start with you to kick off the scene for capacity building in emerging markets, particularly for SMEs. I know ANDE has played a critical role in strengthening entrepreneurial ecosystems around the world. Can you give us an overview of ANDE as an organization, very brief, and why capacity building of small and growing businesses is so important in emerging markets and right now?
Sure, Heather. Thanks a ton to you and to Graham and the rest of the IFC team for the opportunity to be here today. And congratulations to you all. I've been following the development of these principles in this guide for probably the 2 years that you've been putting it together. So I just wanted to give you the thumbs up. I know today is a great day for you guys, and I hope you get a little bit of a vacation afterward. And also just a quick shout out on our end of gratitude to the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, who's been supporting all of our COVID response work as we've tried to respond to support the small and growing business sector in emerging markets in the wake of COVID. And just briefly about ANDE, you sort of mentioned who we are with this global network. A couple points I would highlight which we think are important. One, we very much try to represent the full ecosystem of players that are relevant to supporting the cultivation of ecosystems in emerging markets. So our members include big institutions like the IFC and the World Bank Group and major foundations. We have donor agencies, we have corporations, we have training institutions at universities, but the core of ANDE are organizations that directly support small and growing businesses. So that's the investors that invest in them. And then about 40% of our membership are organizations that provide some sort of capacity development to those small and growing businesses. And that could be training or mentorship or a lot of incubation acceleration services. And the other thing that's, I think, important to share with this group is that we are a global entity that has 8 regional chapters that are spread throughout emerging markets. So while we're based in the United States, I have colleagues based in 3 African countries, 3 Latin American countries, actually 4 Latin American countries now, and 2 Asian countries. So we are to be relevant to all the work that's taking place, not just in places like Washington and London, but really most importantly, where the people that we're talking about and with today, training institutions actually interact with small and medium enterprise. And so to answer your question, your second question directly, like why do we think it's so important? It's because ultimately it is these players, these intermediaries that provide the kind of critical training and guidance to small and medium enterprises, and without which we think we would not see the vibrancy that exists in many emerging markets. So they're a critical player in the direct support, but they also are the linkages. They are the glue within entrepreneurial ecosystems that help connect different institutions to each other. So investors rely upon capacity development providers to help them find deal flow, and government and major donor institutions rely upon organizations like this to find the businesses that either already are thriving or could thrive if they get the right kind of support. So ANDE believes passionately in supporting these kinds of organizations, and as I mentioned, they're a major part of our membership.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks so much, Randall. And you've been doing an excellent job on gathering information around how the COVID-19 pandemic is impacting the needs of these critical stakeholders, as we call them, capacity builders. And I know that Andy recently published a publication, The SGB Sector in the COVID-19 Crisis. Could you share some of the key risks and needs and what solutions are being implemented or recommended to capacity builders in light of COVID-19?
Yeah. So the first important takeaway from our research, which is based on a number of different surveys and then some external reviews of others, SGBs themselves, small and growing businesses themselves, are in deep trouble around the world. But what is being lost, unfortunately, by most of the observers, or not focused on enough, is the fact that the capacity development providers as well are in grave danger. And so there's information that describes that most small and medium enterprises have only about 6 weeks of cash available. And that's globally. That includes developed countries like the United States and the European countries. Many emerging market countries, the SGBs themselves have even less than that. And unfortunately, that description of the financial precariousness of these businesses is similar for many capacity development providers that exist around emerging markets. And so while we have seen the capacity development providers responding quickly to try to change their business models and become digital, to develop new training and new programming to support small businesses in the context of a specific health crisis, they themselves are at grave risk. And our survey that was done in late March and early April showed that about a third of the organizations thought that they were in danger of going bankrupt in the next 1 to 6 months. And we're doing a new survey now to see how things are going. So we are quite concerned about that. And the other point I want to emphasize here is that while we are seeing a variety of programs at government levels, at international development levels to support the small and medium enterprises, there is a significant lack of response and development of programs to support capacity development providers. And sort of hot press, I'll stop here in a second, but we did an assessment with our regional chapter staff to identify programs that existed at the regional level to help small businesses and the intermediaries that help them. And we identified over 100 programs that were broadly supporting the sector, but of those, only 8 were inclusive of the SGB intermediaries, of these capacity development providers, and only 1 focused exclusively on SGB intermediaries. So I'm just really worried.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thanks for that. And thanks for the sobering information. I think the way you described it, these capacity builders really are the threads to the entrepreneurial network. So we really have to figure out how we can support them. And 2 of these capacity builders are joining us today, and that's Margaret and Adnan. And Margaret, I'd like to turn to you because we'd love to hear from you about your perspective. I mean, you've enabled a really strong ecosystem in Africa, and I believe you're based out of Ghana. And so you've trained thousands of entrepreneurs. It'd be great to hear from you just to give us an overview of Rainbow Consult and, how have you been able to reach so many entrepreneurs and tell us a little bit about the impact of your work as well.
Thank you very much, Heather. And I say hello to all my colleagues. I see a lot of the facilitators online, and I say hello to all of you. And back to the question on Rainbow Consult. Heather, we started in 2004 as a boutique HR consulting firm. I started from my outhouse as a boutique HR firm. Then in 2009, we were fortunate to go for the IFC Training of Trainers program, and that opened our eyes to opportunities. And when we had to sign a partnership with IFC back then, we realized that we needed to put in place a strategic plan and to think big and to think ahead. So that forced us to put together a strategic plan, and IFC introduced us to the concept of working with financial institutions and the SMEs. That's the financial institutions work with their clients. So that gave us the idea that we could train corporate value chains. You know, we could train SMEs in the value chains of these large corporates. So we started changing the way we work. And in 2020, now I can proudly say that we are not only offering HR services, we are into entrepreneurial skills development, the full range. We also are into providing strategic management services and research and compliance for not only small and medium-sized enterprises, but for large corporates as well. So that's Rainbow in brief. The numbers. I think in trying to describe what we do at Rainbow, also Rainbow Consult, I've also given you an idea of the numbers. So we've trained over 5,000 entrepreneurs now and counting. Now with the advent of COVID-19, you know, I don't know whether to say it was a blessing or a bane. It depends on how you look at it. But we have been organizing webinars, and webinars enable us to reach a lot of entrepreneurs at the same time. There are times that we reach about 200 entrepreneurs organizing just one webinar. So you can imagine, I'm sure by the end of the year, maybe the number of 5,000 would have doubled because we are able to reach so many at a go. And now because we are using technology, we are not doing a lot of face-to-face. So we are able to reach people on other continents. We are organizing webinars. We've got the opportunity, and we are there in people's faces. You know, they see us all the time. They see our adverts. So now we get calls, we get emails, and organizations all over the world are asking us, can you do online training for us? So as we sit, we are planning for online training for participants in the Philippines, in Costa Rica. We wouldn't have done that. And, you know, I think, Heather, I can't talk about reach without talking about impact. And I could go on and on and on because we've been in the field for some time, but I would like to speak about only one project that we did with SMV and Fidelity Bank. So the idea was SMV was providing funding for the entrepreneurs in water and sanitation in Ghana, but decided that if the money was given to the entrepreneurs, you know, maybe the recovery rate wouldn't be, because the entrepreneurs will know that it's from an NGO. So the money was routed through Fidelity Bank. But the agreement was that Rainbow was to prepare the small and medium-sized enterprises to build their capacity and to prepare them for finance. We did that. The small and medium-sized enterprises that were prepared for funding, in the long run, were able to access funding. And believe it or not, the funding was in the beginning 18.8 million cedis. In a matter of 5 years, the fund had revolved to around 27.3 million cedis. Over 2,000 jobs were created out of that project. And the recovery rate for the loans was around 92%. Check that out.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Your enthusiasm. Oh, do you mind muting yourself for just a moment? I think I'm getting some feedback. Wonderful. Thank you, Margaret. No, your enthusiasm is fantastic, and thanks for sharing that example. It's an excellent example of how to demonstrate impact, not only the benefits of the training, but also how these trainings connect to critical resources for SMEs, such as access to finance. And you touched a little bit on COVID, and I'm going to come back to that, particularly how you've been navigating it in terms of moving to digital formats of training. But one thing I do want to ask, and this came up in our conversation before the panel, is how you have been making sure that women have equal access and can participate in your programs. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about this. I mean, some of the things that we've been seeing, and this isn't only a challenge because of COVID, but oftentimes women can't participate in these training programs because they're facing disproportionate challenges, particularly around childcare, such as unpaid work. There's statistics that show that women take on 3 times more unpaid care work than men. So I know that you have some solutions that you've been looking at, particularly with your work to support entrepreneurs, and love to hear a little bit more about how you've been considering gender.
I guess I don't need to say how passionate I am about women and how I want as many women to be trained, how I want as many women to have their capacity built. You know, initially I used to be passionate, but I realized that I didn't have solutions. So, you know, the first time my eyes were open to these sorts of solutions was when I went for my first Training of Trainers program with IFC. So what we do at Rainbow Consult is that we think about advertising. You know, when we have a program, the way you advertise your program is very critical. We were making, you know, I can't even believe we were making that sort of mistake. You would advertise a course on accounting and have a man smartly dressed as, you know, your poster person. And so we didn't realize that we were sending the wrong message to a lot of women who felt that figures were for sort of men, you know. So now when we advertise, we make sure that we have both a man and a woman. We also realize that it is very important for nursing mothers to attend our workshops. So we send a message right out there that if you are a nursing mother, don't worry. We have a childcare service. You know, we have a childcare service that will take care of your child. You will have the liberty to train, to stay in our workshop whilst your baby will be taken care of. And we have trained people to take care of babies. And it's been working well for us. And the women are always so grateful. We also consider having a gender awareness program for all our trainers. You go through that. We want to be on the same page. And even right down to designing our case studies. You know, sometimes you think of the roles. When you're designing your case study, you think about when is a boss. You say Mr. Harrison is the boss. And Miss Margaret Jackson is the secretary. You know, it would come without, you wouldn't even think twice about it. But now we don't do that. I mean, we make sure that if there's a man secretary here, there's a woman boss here, and then the other one maybe role, you have a man take it as well. We are not saying take it all away. We are saying make sure there's a good mixture for the women as well. You know, these are some of the initiatives we have taken to ensure that we make our women participants feel really comfortable when they come into our workshops. Thank you. I think you are muted.
I am, thank you. No, I was just commenting that those are really great examples, from communications to childcare services to making sure that the trainers participate in gender awareness programs. And I'm going to give a shameless plug here for the gender supplement to the Guide to Training, because a lot of these considerations are included in it. So just flagging that. I'm conscious of time. I want to make sure that we have the opportunity to hear from Adnan. And so Adnan is based out of Yemen. And Adnan, are you online now? Can you hear me? You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, perfect. So thanks so much for joining today. One of the questions that we wanted to discuss with you and that you raised when we had our prep conversation was, well, first, we'd love to hear just a really brief overview of CMC. And then particularly given the environment that you've been operating in, how have you sustained success and navigated many of the challenges within Yemen?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank IFC for the opportunity for organizing for learning and guide to training. That's really.
Oh, I think we're having problems hearing you, Adnan.
That we really needed in our compensated market. CMC is one of the great.
Adnan, we don't hear you well. I think you have a mic issue. Please, if you can double check, so we can improve the quality.
Yeah.
the sound on your side.
I'm going to ask Edgar, who's been helping us with the tech, to see if you could work with Adnan quickly to see if we could bring his sound back on board. And Adnan, while we're bringing your sound on board, I'll come back to Randall and revisit the topic of COVID, and not to just only focus on the negative here with the pandemic. But Randall, you have some interesting, you had mentioned that the COVID-19 has impacted some of the capacity builders. You know, given that we've had gender as part of this topic, I was wondering if there's any interesting insights that you could bring about how women entrepreneurs are being affected by COVID-19 in your network.
Yes, I guess interesting, but sadly, and maybe not unexpectedly, they are being impacted worse than male-led entrepreneurs. So what we found in our surveys is that the intermediaries that work with women entrepreneurs, and then a separate survey of women entrepreneurs, is that they find themselves to be at greater risk of potential bankruptcy as a result of the crisis. And we have that at a kind of level, and we did a deep dive in India. And that was a place where we saw a particularly large gap between the male and female-led businesses. So one time, it's not a silver lining, but one source of hope is that these were based on expectations, not actual closures, although women had temporarily closed their businesses at a faster rate than male-led entrepreneurs in the wake of the initial onset. So it's a little too soon to say what the ultimate impacts will be, but unfortunately we expect that case in the sector for a long time, that women-led businesses will be more negatively impacted than male-led businesses.
Right. Well, thanks for that. And much of the gender gaps that had been prevalent before being exacerbated by COVID-19. And I'd like to go to Margaret. I think you mentioned the transition to providing trainings in a digital format, particularly, and you saw this as an opportunity within COVID-19. But I also think there is some gender challenges there. We know that women tend to have fewer access to the internet and fewer access to mobile phones to be able to access digital training programs. So could you tell us a little bit about how Rainbow Consulting is navigating these challenges?
Heather, if I had the emoji, you would have seen me crying, because I'm crying. I'm so sad. For the women who are technologically savvy, we are still working with them. For those who are not, we keep on saying, this too shall pass. COVID-19 will be over soon. We will start our face-to-face training. We will start educating you again. We try to send messages as to how, you see, but because of social distancing protocols and the fact that schools are even closed, we can't even tell them now that go to the center and we will help you. We are trying as much as we can to send messages to tell women how to make sure they navigate around these things. When was it? This weekend, I was teaching someone how to even use the voice note on WhatsApp so that we could communicate. So we are trying all we can. So we hope that when the dust settles, we will quickly organize. If we had known, would have gone to a lot of them. But, you know, some don't have access to internet, and there's nothing much we can do as we sit, but to hope that with the little messages we send to those who have WhatsApp messages, for those who are not really technologically savvy, we can help them during this period. I'm really crying, and it's a headache. But for those who are technologically savvy, we have worked with some in Nigeria, some in Ghana, and it's good.
Okay. No, that's really helpful. And I'm just checking. Oh, sorry. Can you mute yourself?
Sorry.
Great. Thanks so much, Margaret. And I was just checking with Adnan. It looks like his sound isn't back yet. So I'll ask one more question to Randall and Margaret. Given these challenges that you mentioned, in that the principles and guidelines, the guidance notes for the trainings have been launched today, would love to hear, Randall, from you. You know, how do you think these principles can be helpful in light of these challenges, and also if there's any forward-looking that you have on the capacity building industry, how these principles and guidelines can be used? I'll let you think about that question for a moment, and then I'll ask Margaret hers, and then come back to you. And Margaret, for you, how would you, I mean, you've been involved with IFC's skills development programs for quite a while, and how do you think that these principles and guidance notes for trainings will help your business and those, the SMEs that you support? So think about that for a moment, and then Randall, I invite you to answer the question.
Okay.
Sure.
So do you want me to go or Randall?
No, we'll go to Randall first, and if you could just mute your microphone, Margaret. Thank you.
So thanks for the question. One of the things that Andy does, one of the sort of products that we develop are our entrepreneurial ecosystem snapshots, which we've now done of about 20 or 30 different either metro areas or in some cases countries around the world. And the purpose of those is to understand who the different players are in the space. So we look at who are the training institutions, who are the investors, who are the banks that support SMEs. And I share this because these are really, really useful in knowing who's doing what. But what's really hard to understand is who's doing it well. And so I do believe that having standards like this, and more importantly, just having the guides to help all of these training institutions that want to do the best possible job, and then on top of that, having standards and certifications that actually signify that they are competent to do a good job, will lead to better quality training to help the small businesses that we all want to help. So we'll see how it works, right? We're launching it today. But the idea of having this kind of training materials available and a certification on top of it, I think is really, really important for the sector. And I'm really hopeful that IFC just promote this today, but will have, as you have the website, a really significant push to make sure that this gets out into the field.
Great. Thanks so much, Randall. And I also think networks like Andy are really important for the peer learning. Standards are being applied because every context is so different. So definitely a role with the type of network that you lead to be able to make sure the standards are shared and learned. So thank you. Margaret, over to you.
Heather, I'm a walking testimony of standards and principles. I was introduced to standards and principles years back when I went for my first training of trainers. And I have a secret to share with all of you today. You know, when I attended the training of trainers program, I was wowed the methodology and the techniques, the tools. I put my manual under my pillow, and I would read and go over almost every day. And I haven't forgotten this with feed, a formula for giving feedback. I would use it on my family members, my children, and at a point, my family members got bored. And you know, a lady born on Saturday in Ghana is called Ama. And my family members used to call me Ama Business Edge Methodology, put it away. But it paid off. It paid off. And that is only one aspect that I'm talking about. So having everything in one place, having the tools, having the considerations, everything in one document. I'm sure if I've had that years back, then maybe my organization wouldn't even work from Accra. I don't know where it would be working for, maybe Mars or space. You know, I think this is icing on the cake. So if we look at them, if we practice what the tips and make them real, we will set ourselves apart. I had only one aspect. Now everything has been put in one document. This is fantastic for me. I mean, to me.
Great.
It will work.
Thanks so much. Wonderful. May I ask that you mute yourself?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. No, wonderful, and thanks for those insights. And I'm seeing, as you both are speaking, I'm seeing comments on the chat of saying, great, thanks so much, and sharing their experiences. So lots of virtual heads nodding through the chat. And unfortunately, we cannot get Adnan's sound back on, so we won't be able to bring him into the questions. But I see that before we go into the Q&A, I see that some of our regional managers in IFC's Financial Institutions Group have joined the conversation today. And I'd love to open this up for Kamar Salim, who's our regional manager in Asia and Pacific, to comment on the relevance of the skills and capacity building in your region and how COVID-19 has impacted this. So welcome, Kamar.
Heather, and a pleasure to join. And in addition to my role, as you know, I've been involved in the SME finance space globally ever since I joined IFC 8 years ago. So I'd like to make, I think, three quick comments. I think one is the capacity needs and the importance of it. Capacity building needs for SMEs. So just to give an example, when we surveyed SMEs in China, 65% of the SMEs said they can only survive 3 months in a lockdown environment, in an order downturn environment. When we surveyed SMEs in India, one third SMEs were closing every 1 month of lockdown. So what it highlights is the need for agility and the need to be on the feet to respond to the crises and the issues that are surfacing. And that led to the need to have to embracing technology. I think that is something that has come out very clear in this, and just not embracing technology for their finance, for their business operations, but also for embracing technology in their partnerships. So I'll give you an example of three startups that came out in Pakistan: Salesflow, Tajir, and Bazaar. There were three startups that came that were purely order taking from retailers and actually asking SMEs to deliver and some of the suppliers to deliver those to the retailers and eventually connecting it to the consumer. So I do think, while we look at the issues when we have seen in Asia, I think we've seen some sunset industries and some sunrise industries. So I think there are new sets of players coming into this space. So I just wanted to put that on the table. And I would like to second what Randall mentioned in his remarks on the women entrepreneurs. We are seeing that we work with an enterprise called SEWA, which is the Self-Employed Women Association in India. They have 2.5 million women entrepreneurs, and we are working with them on capacity building of the 2.5 million entrepreneurs that they have. And they have, as we compare, quite negatively impacted. So I do think there's a need to look at the women entrepreneur segment much more closely than we've ever been. I think that's one on the SME capacity needs. The second comment I'd like to make is more on the role of financial institutions. But more than ever, I think the role of financial institutions is far more important. While we can do isolated capacity building of SMEs, but just to give you one example, we have a client in China who alone has 200 million SMEs in their portfolio. We have two banks in Pakistan combined together, they reach one third of the SMEs in the country. So I think we need to really make sure that we enable these financial institutions and we leverage. So the role of financial institutions is, to provide non-financial services is multiplied by 10 now, I would say, than it was 6 months ago. So I do think we need to pay a bigger attention to that. And last comment I'd like to make is we should not only see SME as a problem, as a problem child right now. I do think SMEs, and I was in a very deep conversation with Stanchart and some of the other international institutions, SMEs will have a clear role to play in COVID recovery. And I think we need to enable that because I think once we enable the COVID recovery through SMEs, the recovery will be faster. And we have seen that in China. Once China came on board, the SMEs played a very important role in really getting the economy back on track. So I think that's what I'll conclude with. And just one final comment on the on really the principles of learning and the topic for today. I do feel this is possibly a very, very important initiative, and I must congratulate all the teams who have kind of taken it off the ground. But the only thing I'd like to highlight is that the age of manual is over. I think it has to be much more interactive. It has to be much more dynamic. Any training capacity building we provide has to be much more agile. So while we are asking SMEs to be agile, I think the capacity building structures that we put into place has to be also equally agile. So I'll conclude here, and I really congratulate on the initiative, and really I think Asia, as you know, has been in this the longest. Since January, we have been in COVID environment, and we have seen now South Asia take a dive where we are facing some significant. So I think Asia of the MSA finance gap, as you know, 60% of the global finance gap sits in Asia. So for all the regions, I think for our region, getting SMEs to success is far more important than it ever was. So thank you for giving me the time and opportunity to speak. Thank you, Heather.
Great. Thanks so much, Kamar, and thanks also for bringing a positive spin into all of this. There's a lot of innovation that could happen with SMEs, so thanks for highlighting that. And I'd like to also invite Riyadh, who is our manager in Middle East and North Africa, to share his comments from the region as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me first thank you, and I'm talking from Rabat, from North Africa. Let me thank Randall and Margaret. And Margaret, really, your positive energy is contagious. You gave me a huge appetite to go and follow the trainers of trainings now and get the certificate like you. And really thank you for all what you are doing for the women in West Africa, taking care of babies to provide trainings, make me feeling like small, following what you are doing with the finance institution. So thank you for all this commitment. And Randall, you provided lots of feedback. I may have good news to share today, because since we started the COVID-19, and it's not really new for FIG, and in general, the way on how we try, SME banking is huge in our portfolio. When financial inclusion, it's all about our mandate. I will share with you a few numbers, but I think the good news is the way on how we see things moving forward. And when we talk about the SME banking, we don't limit the way on how we support the financial sector ecosystem to our support to the banking sector. And we believe strongly around the three pillars, the access to finance, the access to market, and the access to knowledge. And training, it's highly demanded, and it's crucial. And we are happy that since the last 60 months, we build, thanks to the work that was done by our colleagues, we build strong non-financial services capabilities. Before the COVID-19, I was fighting with my colleagues. I told them, we included 15.2 million people in Africa. Can you guys flag through NFS and we do something digitally to really reach all of these people with clear message, simple message? And I think the COVID-19 gave us like a catalytic role to start doing it. And the good news is that, look, we believe already on NFS, but I strongly believe that during the COVID-19 and post-COVID-19, training the NFS will come back as a main value proposition to support our banking sector. And we have started seeing it. Look, the last few weeks, and part of our COVID-19 answers, we prepared ourselves, we translated all the support that we can provide during the COVID-19 directly to the SMEs on how they can navigate through this crisis. We translated into Arabic, French, English, reflecting the region that we are covering. And believe me, in a few weeks, we trained already 1,500 SMEs. And we are trying to do it not by going to the market, by going to the finance institution and try to support through the finance institution a clearly identified client. And we got a huge demand. In Kenya, one of the banks, they already tell us, can we train the 1.1 million clients that we have in the portfolio? So there is a clear demand. I think we can have a follow-up on this call, and we can see how we can help. One of the things that matters, Randall, in what you said, look, we are convinced, and that I am deeply convinced, at least myself, that to tackle the COVID-19 in terms of advisory service delivery model, we need to rely more and more on people in the ground. Instead of having people in the hubs, we need to try to have people everywhere. And the trainers network is powerful. And that's how we were able to deliver a non-financial service COVID-19 answer during the crisis, because we found them in Kenya, we found them in Cote d'Ivoire. They are already in Ethiopia, trained, ready to support us. It's a good opportunity for them, but a good opportunity for us that we can deliver what we believe is good now in terms of non-financial services. So look, it's really very interesting. Thank you guys for organizing this. Thank you again, Randall and Margaret. Happy to have a few follow-up discussion and talks on this. And thank you again for your participation. Over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Riyadh and Kamar, for those remarks. So we have a little bit of time for Q&A before I pass this over to Martin for closing remarks. And we've polled a few questions that many of you have typed in. And I'm going to share two questions. And I know that we couldn't hear from Adnan, but behind the scenes, we're all figuring out how we can either have Adnan do an interview afterwards, or a way that we can share his really important insights of operating in Yemen. So stay tuned on that. But so one of the questions we have, and I would, Margaret, this is for you. You know, most of the SMEs, at least, and also what we're hearing in this conversation, is that they're focusing on survival and are less interested perhaps in training, and this is coming from the African context, and they can't pay for training. What are your thoughts around the ability to pay for training and how that can impact and how that will impact capacity builders? And please unmute yourself.
So I hear you say most of the small and medium scale in the enterprises cannot pay for training, and how can we help in that direction? I think there's one thing that's making it work now. Online training is making it easier and cheaper, because previously, before COVID-19, it was mostly, if you did face-to-face, you had to think about venue, you had to think about food, you had to think about transportation, you know, all the other related costs. But now with COVID-19, and I think IFC has even started with having the development partners help us to help the small and medium scale industries to survive and thrive after COVID-19. The webinars have been very good. I think we can even go further by organizing maybe 2 to 3 hour courses that are not so expensive, you know, in terms of online, if they have access to internet and they have a laptop, we could train and still have the same effect. So I think this is one of the ways that we can ensure that a lot of SMEs get their capacity built. And they could even have coaching online. Why not? It can be done. We've got to be innovative. We've got to be creative.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. And much of what we talked about has been on the around what's called wraparound services in terms of coaching and mentoring to ensure what's being trained can actually be leveraged and utilized. Another question that's come up is really around the delivery of virtual trainings, and this pertains to the webinars that you've mentioned. And can you comment a little bit around how you're navigating delivering quality trainings, particularly where there's a low bandwidth environment, and how you might be using any type of apps? And Randall, I'd invite you to comment on this as well, if there's any innovations or any insights that you've seen within the network of Andy members. But Margaret, over to you first.
What we've been doing is, you know, videos take up a lot of bandwidth. So what we've been doing now is to ensure that participants don't put on their videos. And most of the time we're using chats and the other tools that are, even if it's online training, you could use your whiteboard, you could, you know, we could go into breakout sessions. You can do all that without necessarily having videos. So these are things that we're using, and having activities, making sure that participants are still being engaged online. So the key is engage them online. The key is use all the tools. And I would like to say this to all the facilitators, that we should learn how to use the softwares available now, because this is the way to go for some time. I did a study on Spanish flu and realized that it took about 2 years for things to get to, you know, not even normal, but, you know, so it's going to take us a while. So we need to leverage what we have now to make sure we have impact. And we must make sure we know how to make online learning very interactive. For me, that is key. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Margaret.
Just briefly, I would toast Zoom. Thank God they exist. And I was commenting with my colleagues the other day, what if we had had this crisis 10 years ago? And even then, we didn't have this level of connectivity and the software to support it. I'm really sensitive to some of the comments I'm seeing, which is that's great, but there are lots of places in emerging markets which do not have enough internet connectivity to do a video conference. So to me, a takeaway is for the IFC. I'm sure you're focusing on this already, but fund that. Like this is going to become more and more critical. We now have the software and the hardware that will allow us to do many, many more things virtually than ever before. But in many places, they're unable to access it. And so a takeaway is, wow, this stuff actually does work. And we've had very little lost productivity at Andy as a result of going virtual. Shocking to me. But we're fortunate, and there are too many parts of the world that are not.
Great. Thanks so much, Randall. And definitely investments in ed tech is the next theme in how we can make sure that folks have access to this, particularly in areas where there's limited bandwidth and low internet access. So thanks for highlighting that. So the last question, I would go to Graham, because there's been quite a few questions around the principles. And could you, in 1 minute before we turn this over to Martin, tell us a little bit about the principles, if they're free to use, how can they be shared, how can they be accessed, and how will they be, how you feel that they'll be adopted by different organizations? So a couple questions all in one.
Thank you. I think that's 3 questions. So the principles and the guide to training are both public goods. They are fully available through either the IFC website or the growlearnconnect.org site. We would really encourage everybody to access them. And as I said, we would like to engage further with organizations and encourage them to actively kind of recognize or adopt these tools, within their organizations, and encourage their networks to use these tools or have access to these tools. So there is no there is no cost associated with using them. They are public goods, and just to also build on kind of Kamar's comment of earlier about the importance of making them applicable to kind of online and digital. So they have been kind of developed with that in mind. So they are applicable to the development of online and digital courses. The manuals, the guide, the principles themselves will also be available online and in an interactive form. So we would very much like to hear from other organizations or engage with other organizations as they seek to review and kind of adopt these guide and principles. And I think with that, perhaps as we're coming to a close, I would just like to pass over to Martin Holtman. Martin is a manager within IFC's Financial Institutions Group, based in Washington, D.C., for his closing remarks and summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. So thank you all for your interest, and thank you especially to the panelists for your great contributions. My first follow-up, I think I'll join in the classroom together with Riyadh, is of course to book a training with Margaret. By the way, my Ghanaian name is Ebo. I was born on a Tuesday, okay? And I got one of my first trainings, in fact, in accounting and finance with the Volta River Authority in Tema. Long time.
Oh, you're welcome. Come. Yes, I live in Tema. Good to know.
The universe makes it happen, okay? So we've all known for a long time that an improved standard of living and development results from advances in technology and knowledge, and not so much from the accumulation of capital. And that's why we in IFC are so interested to add this knowledge to the capital that we invest in emerging markets. And in fact, 2 famous economists got the Nobel Prize for work in that space, in the knowledge space. And that was Paul Romer, who used to work in the World Bank, and also Ken Arrow, who first wrote about this in the 1960s. So we've known this for a long time. But the production of knowledge differs from that of other goods, and market economies alone typically do not produce and transmit the knowledge that's needed efficiently. So that's where we all come in. Training is a crucial factor for small businesses. It stimulates proactive thinking rather than reactive thinking, and therefore it helps to stimulate creativity and productivity and growth, which is what we're all after. So IFC and our partners, hundreds of whom are here on this call, are working on creating a learning society. And I want to thank all of you, all the hundreds of people who are on the call for what you're doing in that space and your contributions. We could not do this alone. We highly need you, and we look forward to continue to work with you, and we will continue to offer these kinds of seminars. So with that, I just want to thank everybody who participated and of course the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. So just to close, thanks so much to everybody for joining today. I'll put back the contact information. Welcome any additional contact or anybody that would like to reach out to us following the webinar today. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to our panelists, Randall and Margaret, and their speakers, Kamar and Riyadh and Graham. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.